Hello to those people who are online and who can hear me. Sorry, just playing with the... we'll just wait for a few more people to come online and then we'll start in a couple of moments. I'm just going to check back to make sure everybody... I haven't received any other email messages about any problems. Okay, so I think we have people signing up, signing on. Let me just double check the list. Yes, seems to be going okay. That's all good. Right, well, I'm going to start the webinar. I will check back after a couple of slides to see if anybody else has arrived or if anybody has any problems. I think everybody knows the drill. You see me for a little bit at the beginning. You made it. Gemma's there. Right. Hi, Gemma. Fantastic. Great. So I think people are logging on okay. So I'm going to start the presentation and then I will check back to see if there are any problems. So I'll just do a few slides just to sort of make sure that we are running smoothly. So here we have, this is the summary today. We're doing the Creative Europe Culture Programme webinar. I think that, we've done the interaction. Most of you, I think, will have been on another webinar. The only button you really need to worry about is the chat. Ignore the hand up and everything else. It's the chat. If you want to send me a question or a comment or a worry, then please do. If something goes terribly wrong and you lose the seminar and you can't get back in, then what we will probably do is be able to let you see a recording of the webinar, which we keep for a couple of days. So if there's a real problem, I'm sure we'll be able to sort that out. Do also note that there is a 30 to 40 second delay after I speak before you actually hear me. So this sometimes may mean that I don't immediately hear your questions because they take a while to come in after you've heard me speak. Okay, so a little bit of background about the European Union. And again, if you've been to one of my webinars before, you'll probably have heard these, but I just do want to make the point about the Article 167 in the treaty. Now, obviously, this is particularly relevant to the culture programme because this is the only part of the treaty which is the legal framework for the European Union, which mentions culture specifically. This is the article which allows the European Union to act in the field of culture. It talks about the flowering of the cultures of member states, national and regional diversity, and the common cultural heritage. The European Union is constrained by the member states as to what funding it can provide for cultural projects. It can only fund cultural projects where there is genuine cooperation and collaboration between a range of partners. I mean, there are different focus on that. I mean, some programs such as literary translation program, there is less focus on collaboration, but generally most people will be going for one of the project grants, and obviously within the project grants then cooperation and collaboration is essential. Ways in which common cultural heritage, now that's a phrase that at one point there was various definitions of what it meant. There's no actual definition these days. I think the European Union is open to ideas about how the arts might reinterpret definitions of common cultural heritage in the 21st century. What does that really mean these days when we have a range of migrant communities who've settled in Europe, where we have some clear cultural challenges, as evidenced by the terrible events in Paris recently and so on. I think projects which in some way, respond to some of the challenges that Europe faces in the 21st century that have some links to the broad definitions of culture are something the Commission will be very interested to see. Secondly, there is Europe 2020. You know, the two documents that sort of provide the context for these funding programs. One is the treaties, the legal framework, and the second one is the Europe 2020 document, which is the mission statement, the overall guidelines for the European Union for the current 10-year period, 2010 to 2020. And within that, there are a number of themes, and these are here. Now, there's nothing that specifically mentions culture, but in fact, the culture program, even the culture program these days, takes into account some of these themes. So you'll see some of these words and phrases reiterated in the priorities and objectives and so on of the culture program when we come to look at it, particularly technological development, ICT, competitiveness, new business models, addressing issues to do with employment, social inclusion, education and training, and so on. These are themes of the European Union that are reflected within the culture program objectives and priorities, and in a sense, the more you can address some of those themes, not all of them, but you know, one or two of those themes in your culture program application, you know, the greater your chances of success. Okay, funding programs, the structural funds, the transnational funds, and the external actions. The culture program fits into the transnational fund. So it's a transnational fund encouraging organizations, individuals to work together. So that's the focus of that particular program. You'll see the transnational funds are 15% of the European Union's budget, and the culture program is a relatively modest part of that 15%. But still, it's an important program. It's the only program that specifically says culture in terms of European Union funding. Okay, I'm just going to briefly pause at this point and go back to check whether anybody has sent any questions or comments that I may have missed. No, nobody has. Okay, I will keep going. I'll keep coming back to the chat room to see if there are any questions or comments as we go through, but for the time being, I will go forward on the presentation. Okay. So transnational funds, these are some of the transnational funds. We're looking at the Creative Europe program, which is about 1.5 billion euros overall. So not a huge amount, but still an important amount. Transnational, as again, I think many people will have seen this, but just to make it clear that transnational projects can fund either projects involving parts of different European countries, or they can fund mobility activities. Now, the culture program does not provide small grants for mobility. So you can't apply to the culture program for an individual grant to sort of go up, participate in a visit or an exchange. Mobility is obviously one of the key components of the projects. So you can apply for project grants within the culture program, but you can't apply for individual mobility grants. Okay, and when it comes to projects, there is match funding that is required, and I'll explain much more about match funding as we go through. So culture program, we're looking at project grants here. So within Creative Europe, there are 3 strands to the Creative Europe program. Although there is this new program called Creative Europe, essentially what is happening is that the previous culture program and the previous media program are carrying on similarly to how they were before, but with a few changes, a few quite important changes. So under Creative Europe, we have the culture program, we have the media program, and we have this new financial facility, which is there to support bank loans to people working in the sector, to organizations in the arts and culture sector. And that will come online in 2016, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. You see the budget there, 1.5 billion euros, over half for the media program, nearly 455 million for culture program, and then the rest for the new financial facility. And then I just make the point at the end there about the fact that we are moving away from the traditional cultural program, which supported citizenship and more traditional arts projects, into the priorities targeting the real needs of the sector. So, you know, this goes back to some of the issues in Europe 2020, unlocking the job creation potential of the cultural and creative sectors, capacity building, the digital agenda, innovation, and so on. And we'll see these reflected in the priorities and objectives as we get to them. Here we have the overall definitions of what's included in the cultural and creative sectors. And I think this is very good just to remind ourselves that these days, it's a very broad definition. You'll see in the red bits at the top, all sectors whose activities are based on cultural values and so on. whether these activities are market or non-market oriented. In other words, you can have profit-making organizations as partners. It's clear that they feel that they want to embrace the broad creative industries, which may include profit-making organizations. And they're also interested in projects where the partners may include at least one organization that is profit-making, on the basis that there needs to be more interaction between the subsidized and the commercial sectors, and subsidized sectors might learn from some of the ways of working in the commercial sector, and perhaps vice versa as well. Whatever the type of structure it carries about, irrespective of how it is financed. So very broad definition, and you'll see the next bullet point, it covers the whole of the value chain, the development, creation, production, dissemination, preservation, and so on, and related functions such as education and management. The next bullet point just gives you a range of examples of different areas, and you'll see that's very broadly based. So almost everything within the cultural sectors, cultural and creative sectors, is included. The only caveat at the bottom there is if you're applying to the culture program, you cannot have a project that is only based on audiovisual activity. Audiovisual may be a part of that particular project application, but it can't be the entire focus. Okay, just to make a couple of points about previous successes in the program that's just come to an end at the end of 2013, you'll see that we put down on this table comparisons between the UK and Italy, which have roughly similar population shares, roughly around 10% of the total populations that are eligible to apply for this. You'll see across the EU in the final column, the success rate was 28.3%. If you look back to the yellow column, you'll see that the UK success was 35.6%. So UK did well, over a third, 1 in 3 applications were successful. That's pretty good. The Italians, on the other hand, had a much, only half that success rate, 1 in 6, 17.7%. But if you look above, you'll see that Italy, even though it had a rubbish success rate, had more successful applications. They had 70 as opposed to the UK 57. And that's because Italy put in a great many more applications. They put in 396, we put in 160. There is certainly scope for more applications to be submitted from the UK. I know I focus on the UK and there are some people from other countries here, so please do take that on board. But certainly from the UK perspective, I think that we could put in more applications and still maintain quite a good success rate. We have a lot going for us. We're just not as engaged in Europe, the concept of Europe and the European Union, as many of our European partners are, and therefore that's one of the reasons why I don't think we're putting in quite as many projects. So we could certainly put in a few more. Okay, the objectives of the overall culture program: support the capacity of the sectors to operate transnationally, internationally, circulation of works, and mobility of cultural and creative players. Now, that circulation of works and mobility of players, those are fundamental principles that have been in the culture program forever. Really important. You don't necessarily have to do both circulation of works and mobility of players, but you certainly have to do one of those. So that's really important. The second objective is audience development. This is a brand new objective, and the European Commission has really taken this to heart. They're really keen to see projects undertake audience development activities within their scope and their activities. Helping people reach new enlarged audiences, improving access to cultural and creative works, focus on various target groups there. You can see new and innovative ways, retaining and enlarging, improving the experience, and so on. So audience development is a very important objective. And the final objective is innovation and creativity. Well, that's very good to see. We're pleased that's there. Artistic innovation is the first example. Great. The second example is the testing of new business models. Now, again, we're starting to see here the influence of the Europe 2020 agenda. So what they're looking for is ways in which the cultural sector might operate slightly differently, taking on board new business models in order to increase their capacity for growth, their development, their income, whatever it might be. The use of digital technologies, that's very important. And then this final comment, the promotion of innovative spillovers on other sectors. Now, people do ask, what on earth does that mean? Well, I think it's fair to say that this is another way in which they're seeking examples of the way in which culture projects impact on the broader European agenda, and in particular Europe 2020. I mean, a simple example of this is if you're doing a project in performing arts or visual art or any art form, working with disadvantaged young people from housing estates, rundown housing estates on the outskirts of a city or town, you may, through the course of your project, be providing those young people with some new skills and capacity that is going to help them maybe even just present themselves better at job interviews, maybe give them some help onto the first rung on the employment ladder and so on. And in that way, your project is contributing to the Europe 2020 objective of reducing unemployment. In a way, your project, your cultural project, is providing a spillover into other sectors and into achieving the goals of Europe 2020. So that's an example of what this means. Now that's it. Those three objectives are the only objectives of the culture program. So that's the fundamental basis on which you would develop a project. After that, there are then 6 priorities, and each project has to address at least 1, maybe 2, at the most 3 of these 6 objectives. Okay, and again, what we're seeing here is a sort of, elaboration of some of the issues that were raised in the objectives. So the first one is about skills, competences, and know-how. So helping the cultural creative sectors adapt to digital technologies, audience development, new business models, and so on. So you'll start to see the same words and phrases from the objectives repeated here. Priority 2, supporting actions to cooperate internationally, internationalize their careers and activities, providing support to strengthen organizations to facilitate access to professional opportunities, the third one. The fourth one, supporting cultural activities, exhibitions, exchanges, festivals, performances, whatever. The fifth one is about literature. There's always a separate one for literature because they're very keen to support literature projects. They're always underfunded, under-resourced. And finally is our old friend, audience development. And that's basically a restatement of what's in the objective in that particular area. So those are the 6 priorities, and you would choose a couple of those. 3 at the most would be our advice. Flexible interdisciplinary approaches. So you can focus on 1 or more priorities at 1 or more points of the value chain in 1 or more cultural and creative sectors. They're really saying, do what you like. They don't want to tie you down. You are the cultural and creative sector. What they're saying is, give us some good ideas. You're the ones who are innovative and creative and imaginative and so on and so forth. You come back to us with good ideas. We've given you the overall objectives and the priorities, but what we want you to do is come back to us with imaginative ideas. The schemes support, in particular, not-for-profit projects, but that doesn't mean that you can't have profit-making partners involved in the projects. And the final one is about subsidiarity, which is essentially that the EU can't fund projects unless there is clearly a European dimension, and that these projects would not be funded otherwise by national funding agencies. Now, I don't think there's anything you need to worry about here. If you're doing a genuine transnational European project with partners from different European countries, then you will automatically be addressing this issue. So let's not worry too much about subsidiarity. Okay, now before I go on to the strands, I'm just going to check back once more. I hope that will be all right, just to make sure that there are no questions that are coming up. Obviously, there'll be time at the end to answer questions, but no more questions. Great. Okay, I will keep going. Famous last words. I will keep going. Okay. So the old strands, there were quite a large number of strands. In the new strands, what we really have is just 4 strands. Projects, the top line there is cultural projects, big projects, small projects. They will continue, and they get the lion's share, 70% of the culture program budget. So that's what we're going to focus on in today's webinar. A literary translation, there are grants for literary translation, and I will briefly say what they're all about, 7% of the budget. There is also some funding for European cultural platforms, 6% of the budget for that. And there's also funding for European networks and occasional special actions. Now, European cultural networks are, networks with members in a wide range of European countries, and I'm not sure that's relevant to anybody who's on this particular webinar, but I can provide more information about that if you wish. So I'm going to concentrate mainly on projects, but I'll say a few words about literary translation and platforms. And here we are. This is the summary of literary translations. Essentially, this is aimed at publishers who want to submit a package of works. They have to be works of fiction to be translated into or out of one of the eligible languages. The eligible languages to translate from include Latin and Ancient Greek. You can't translate into Latin and Ancient Greek, but you can translate from Latin and Ancient Greek. There were two types of categories: 2-year projects, and you can get a maximum grant of 100,000 euros, and then framework partnership agreements over a number of years and get 100,000 euros per year. It's a 50-50 contribution, so the Commission will put in 50% and you have to find the other 50%. Organizations to apply are publishers or publishing houses. And finally, they're keen to raise the profile of the translator in this process as well. So there needs to be a biography of the translator included in each translated and published book. So that's what that's all about. So if you're publishers, then this may be well relevant to you. European cultural platforms. The idea here is what they want to do is they want to give a boost to a number of different cultural areas, a number of different art forms. So what they want to do is encourage a group of organizations. You'll see that there have to be at least 10 partner organizations in a particular art form to come together and to develop a series of activities and actions over a number of years, not necessarily the same project, a number of different actions and activities over a period of 3 years, 2 years, 4 years. And as a result of all this, at the end of that period, that the public will, be able to give greater recognition and status and so on and so forth to that particular art form. And you'll see that they're looking at the very final point there: increased recognition and visibility of artists and creators. They're particularly looking at providing support to new and emerging artists, emerging talent, young people, and so on. Programming, communication activities, and a branding strategy, including, where appropriate, the creation of a European quality label. So the idea that you might, in order to help promote the importance and value of this particular art form, you might create some sort of branding or some sort of label that is attached to particular events or activities or works or whatever, to demonstrate that those are part of this particular art form and have this particular branding attached to them. The Commission is giving a larger share of the budget here. You'll see they give 80%, so the match funding is only 20%. So it's quite generously supported as far as that's concerned, and you can get up to €500,000 per year. But this is aimed at large scale. You'll see coordinator plus 10 partners, groupings within a particular art form to develop that particular art form area. Okay, so let's go and talk about projects, focus on projects. So I said that there were small projects and large projects, and here's a summary of what they mean. Small projects is a minimum of 3 organizations getting together: a lead organization and then 2 or more co-organizers from at least 3 different countries. Large projects is 6 organizations, so the leader plus 5 from 6 different countries. Small projects can get up to 200,000 for the project. Large projects can get up to 2 million euros, which is usually seen at being €500,000 per year for 4 years. Small projects, your 200,000 euros is up to 60% of the budget, so you have to find the other 40% through match funding, and I'll come back to match funding later on. And large projects, it's 50-50. So although 2 million euros is obviously a very generous grant from the European Commission for the large projects, the drawback is you have to find the match 2 million euros. So that may be a challenge for some organizations. You'll see that the length of the projects is now up to 4 years. So any project, whether it's a small project or a large project, can last for 4 years. If you're doing a small project, we would not recommend that you drag it out for 4 years. Maybe 2 or 3 years would be appropriate. And you could also add in what is sometimes known as associate partners. Once you've got your formal partners, your co-organizers involved, you can add in other partners. I'll explain that in a moment. Some project examples. The project guidelines provided by the Commission now do give you some project examples, which is quite a useful starting point. So here we have an example that they give you. This is performing arts example. So cultural organizations, whether they're concert halls or theaters or music groups or whatever, come together to co-produce and or perform and tour in different venues and events. Okay. Now, interestingly, they do now allow you to perform at a single event if that event has a large and recognized international reach with the capacity to have a multiplier effect. So if you were performing at the Edinburgh Festival or Avignon or Salzburg or one of the big European festivals, it may be that that is seen as having an international reach, and you would not necessarily have to tour the work in quite the same way as you would otherwise. What they're looking at here, you'll see in the rest of this, new and avant-garde works, the importance of the audience development activities, helping people with their careers, reaching more audiences, developing more cooperation with new partners, and so on. So these are some of the examples that are given here. The second and third example they give you are all about exchanges. Now, the first exchanges here is about capacity building. So enabling people to sort of, move around and work with others on a short-term basis to gain the skills and know-how to adapt to their changing environment, as they say. Digital shift, new business models, and so on and so forth. The other set of exchanges is more about the artistic innovation, stimulating opportunities for people to develop their artistic skills. So this is stays and residencies, helping people with the development of their careers, and so on and so forth. Could include training activities in audience development as well, interaction with local communities, reaching underrepresented groups, and so on. And the final example here is exchanges of artifacts. Now, this is particularly aimed at the museums and heritage sectors, where you may not have, live performers and artists in quite the same way, but you have works. So exchanges of works, new and existing works to circulate, touring exhibitions, loaning exhibits to museums in other countries, extending the lifespan of exhibitions, and so on. However, having given all those examples, it's not expected that every project will be, it's as complicated as those examples imply. It may be that your project is quite simple and straightforward. And in fact, simple and straightforward projects that are genuinely innovative and imaginative are much stronger in terms of their chances of success. I mean, I give this example of a project called Weather Stations, which I think is a very good example of an imaginative project. Essentially, what this project was all about was the partner countries commissioned a writer-in-residence, and the writer-in-residence from one country would go and be based in a weather station in another country. And essentially, that writer-in-residence in that other weather station would spend time reflecting on issues such as the impact of climate change in Europe in the 21st century. And essentially, that was it. That's the project. Obviously, you'll see at the bottom there is additional activities about workshops and involvement of schools and community groups and so on and so forth. But the innovative idea behind the project was based upon issues to do with climate change and so on, which are obviously at the forefront of the European issues in Europe 2020, alongside all the other ones. And it was just imaginative and a brilliant idea. And I think that was, you can understand, I'm sure, why the jury members felt that was worth supporting. So it's the innovative idea, I can't stress that too much, but it's the innovative idea that people are looking for. In terms of some examples of other projects, I've just picked some of the successful UK projects in the first round, okay? So, there's not a lot of detail here, but you can see that they're quite diverse. Large projects, they're pilot theatre, doing a theatre project, a project involving skilling musicians and engaging audiences, involving young people with the European Union Youth Orchestra. Smaller project, Common Cultural Connections, is about maritime archaeology. Curated Place, doing a project with new music. Takeover, I'm not actually quite sure what that Takeover project's all about, but I'll try and find out. And then a project from the Tate about writing exhibitions, exhibiting literature. So some quite interesting projects there, and no doubt there'll be more information on these projects as they start to get going. Okay, so as I've said, the idea, the partnership, I mean, people obsess about the application forms, and no one is suggesting the application forms are completely straightforward, but the application forms are probably not the real challenge. The real challenge is to have your imaginative idea and to have your strong partnership. And though there is an umbilical link between that, you know, the stronger your partnership, the better your chances of working with your partners to help create and develop an interesting and innovative idea. So the idea and the partnership. In terms of you know, getting ready to make an application here, apart from coming to these sorts of webinars and talking to your contact points, and which I'll explain in due course, we do provide, if you're a Connexus member, and I think most people now coming to these webinars are Connexus members, if you go to the Connexus website and log in, you can download the Am I Ready, pardon me, self-assessment template, which is available to Connexus members, which gives you guidance and advice about whether or not you are ready. You can, you know, just undertake a questionnaire to decide whether you are ready and what things you need to do in order to really be ready to make an application here. Okay, partnerships. Let's talk about partnerships. Where can they come from? Actually, before we talk about partners, if you'll forgive me, I'll just go back and make sure that there are no other questions that have come in the meantime. Does the festival strand 1.3.6 not exist anymore, says Gemma. Right. I'm so glad I came back to this so I can answer that question. Okay, we'll go back to the screen share. No, Gemma, the answer to that question is the strand 1.3.6 festivals does not exist anymore. I could talk for hours about why it doesn't exist, but essentially it was a very peculiar strand. It was incredibly popular because you did not actually have to have partner organizations. You only had to have a European component to your festival program, which meant that they were absolutely inundated with applications. The success rate was about 3%, and you had to score 99% in order to be successful. So it was a fairly meaningless program, really, because there were just masses and masses of disappointed festivals. So there is no festival strand anymore. If you are a festival, what you have to do is you have to apply, like everybody else, under the project strand. So you would have to work with other festival organizations, or not necessarily festival organizations. You'd have to work with other organizations in other countries to develop a project which may involve activity during your festival, and it may involve activity during other people's festivals, but it has to be a project. So festivals can still apply, but they can only apply under the project strand. I hope that's clear. Okay. Partners. Where do partners come from? Well, the member states. The member states can all apply, obviously. Then there are other countries can apply once they've signed an agreement to participate. Now, you need to check to make sure all these agreements have been signed. Norway and Iceland have signed an agreement. The countries of the Balkans have now signed an agreement: Albania, Bosnia, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia. And I believe that Turkey has, in fact, now signed. So Turkey is also now an eligible country. So I need to update my slide. Apologies for that. So Turkey is now an eligible country. And in addition, some of the neighborhood countries in Eastern Europe, around the Caucasus, and potentially around the Mediterranean, may also become eligible countries. At the moment, we understand that the agreements have been signed with Georgia and Moldova. So it's not just the 28 member states. It's about 37 countries now are eligible to participate in the culture program. And all those countries are eligible to participate as co-organizers, lead partners, whatever it might be. Okay. This table shows who can do what. So you'll see the group, the column in the middle is the eligible countries. Obviously, the lead organizer must come from an eligible country. And the minimum co-organizers, which is 2 for small projects, 5 for large projects, they must come from other different countries. So if you're going for a small project and your lead organizer is from the UK, then your other co-organizers may come from Greece and Hungary, wherever it might be. Once you have your 3 or 6 from different countries, you can add additional co-organizers if you wish, and they can come from other different countries or even the same country. So once you had your 3 from UK, Italy, Hungary, you could then add another one from Italy or any of those countries, or from a different country. So you have to have 3 or 6 from different countries, and then you can add more from the same or different countries. And then you'll see the bottom row there is you can add associate partners. And associate partners can come from any country, anywhere in the world. and you can spend up to 30% of the budget on the associate countries. So if you wanted to involve the United States or Uruguay or Uganda or somewhere else, you can involve a partner from those countries and spend up to 30% of the budget. And the way in which that budget is spent on their participation is quite open. You can bring some of them over to Europe to participate in the project, or you could go and do a bit of the project in that third country, in Uruguay, wherever you wanted to. But the limit is you can only spend up to 30% of the budget on the involvement or activities within those associate partner countries. I hope that's clear. How many partners? Well, the minimum is 3 or 6. We always say it's good to have at least one more than the minimum number of partners. One reason is that there is a statement which says, if there's a tie in the jury scores, they will give preference to projects with more than the minimum number of partners. So that's something to bear in mind. But the other reason is just insurance in case something goes horribly wrong with one of your partners. If you only have 3 and one of them has to drop out for some reason, then your project has to stop while you sort out the mess, because your project is illegal if it only has 2 partners. But if you had 4 and one dropped out, then you still have 3, so you can keep going while you sort the mess out. So that may be something to bear in mind. Where should partners come from? Well, the key recommendation, in fact, the requirement these days is not your immediate partners. There is a question in the application form which says, to what extent does the partnership go beyond the direct geographical neighbours and draw partners from a diverse geographical range of participating countries? So you do, the idea of having partners from the UK and Ireland and maybe France, that's gone. You really need to sort of spread your partners across Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, and around the Balkans, Mediterranean countries, and so on. So a good spread of partner countries. Practical issues about partners: any sort of organization, they have to be legally recognized in their own country, universities, local authorities, profit-making, not-for-profit, whatever. And they have to be around for at least 2 years at the date of deadline. So this is not, I'm afraid, for brand new organizations. The organizations have to be in existence for at least 2 years. And organizations now need to register to get a participant identification, a PIC code. This is very simple and easy to do, and just makes filling in the form easier, because once you've registered, you give your PIC code to the lead organizer and they just add the PIC codes into the application form and all your details pop up automatically. So it's just a simplified way of doing it, which is good. Individual persons can't apply for these grants. It has to be organizations. Key principles about partnerships, obviously reflecting the fact that this is a European project, so they come from different European countries. New and different strengths. I mean, you can, if you want, have 4 Baroque orchestras in your project partnership, but it might be more interesting and a bit more, imaginative to have organizations from slightly different perspectives. So, you could mix up a museum and a theatre company and a digital installation organization or whatever it might be. You don't have to do that, but it might make the project a bit more interesting and imaginative. Clarity in the structure and role of each partner. What are they doing? How's it going to work? Well, within the application form, there is now a project schedule you need to produce, which has a row for each activity, project meetings, rehearsals, workshops, performances, further project meetings, follow-up, whatever it might be. And in each row, you then identify which partner is leading on that, where it's happening, what are the dates, how much it's costing, and so on and so forth. So it's a very useful schedule that you and your partners will draw up, which clarifies everything that's going on. Roughly equivalent role. Obviously the lead partner will do more, no doubt, but they want to make sure that these aren't, single country projects pretending to be European. It must be clear that there is shared responsibilities and activities across the various partnerships. Developing collective ownership, obviously the partners must be seen to be buying in, to be sort of, putting in their time and effort and so on into the project, and they're all getting something out of it. Obviously this project must be beneficial for the partners as well as for the audiences or visitors or workshop attendees, whoever else is involved. Finding partners. Here are some suggestions about finding partners. There are over 100 European cultural networks that you can join. I'm sure some of you are already members of cultural networks. There are national networks and agencies in individual countries. Virtually every country has an association of theatres or a network of galleries or whatever it might be. You can sort of contact them. The contact points, Creative Europe desks in the small countries. They can be quite useful. You know, if you want to find a particular theatre company working with disadvantaged young people, you know, if you write to the Creative Europe desk in one of the smaller countries, they may well be able to give you, you know, 3 or 4 names of particular companies to contact. There are partner search databases for many programs. I think there are 1 or 2 for the Creative Europe program. You can find that information about those. I think they're being redeveloped at the moment. But the contact point, the official contact point, will give some information about that. And there are also databases of previously successful projects. There are websites on the European Commission that provide that information. And the UK contact point has a database called Space, which provides some information on previously successful projects as well. European offices and local authorities and municipalities may sometimes be able to give you some suggestions of people they're in contact with. Sometimes there are Brussels offices of member states or regions or cities even. For example, there are there's a London office in Brussels, there is a Merseyside office in Brussels. Some of the old RDA regions in England have offices in Brussels. They may be able to sort of give you some assistance. And the Commission finally organises meetings from time to time about the various funding programmes. Now, in a sense, you don't need to go to Brussels to find out about the programs. You can get that from the contact points or from webinars like this and so on. But one of the benefits of going to Brussels, of course, is meeting other people, many of whom will be there to find partners, like Blind Date on a big European scale. And people have made contacts by going to Brussels to attend some of these meetings. Okay, for Connexus members, we're developing some listings of some of these networks that you'll be able to download in these areas as well. Okay, so I'm just going to stop briefly again, just to sort of double check, see if there are any further questions that are coming in. Nope, they're all right so far. So I will now go back to the presentation. Okay, so submitting an application. We're up for the second call now, and it's an annual call, so there's one call each year. I mean, it says announced in July. Well, obviously, we know there's going to be a call with a deadline in October. The announcement, however, is when they put out the new application forms. Now, we expect the application forms to be the same as the last time, but obviously they take the application forms down after the deadline has gone, and then they put them up again a few months before the deadline. So we expect in July there'll be an announcement, and they'll say the new application forms are available. Deadline, first Wednesday in October. You'll be informed by March of the following year, and then your start date will be, you can choose your start date between May and December of the following year. So, for example, if for this coming deadline in October 2015, you can choose a start date from May to December 2016, and then add up to 4 years to get your end date. So if you chose the 1st of September 2016, then your project could run on until the end of August 2020. So this could be quite a long-term planning. But as I said, you don't have to run your project for 4 years. Your project might run for only 2 years. But it's still, we're talking about projects that can't start before the 1st of May 2016. And when we talk about start and end dates, actually, the most important reason for having your start and end date is financial. You cannot have any expenditure or income falling outside of your start and end dates. That's they're the sort of, that's the main reason for being very careful about choosing your end date. And obviously, sorry, your start date and end date. Your end date should obviously be a few months after any final activity, so you've got time to do all the final financial accounting and payments and so on and so forth before the official end date of the project. The UK Creative Europe desk for the Culture Programme is now at the British Council. The lead contact person is Christoph Jankowski, and there are some other people there as well. They've got that new website, creativeeuropeuk.eu, and that's their email. And there are separate contacts in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and you can find those contacts by going to that particular website there. We do offer some services to help you with your application, but obviously we are an independent agency, so there is a small fee attached to any services that we provide to help people with their applications. Online application system, you have to draw up your application in one of the official EU languages. For goodness sake, submit it in English if you possibly can. That's the easiest language. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but it's the easiest language to submit in terms of the greatest chances of the most number of people being able to read your application if it's submitted in English. And interestingly, there is a new, in the fine print of the application forms these days, they say that if there is any dispute over interpretation of any of the points in the application forms in any of the languages in which it is published, it is the English version that will take precedence. So do bear that in mind. There's the website where you can obtain the forms once they are uploaded, and you have to submit the forms by this deadline of 12 noon, which is Brussels time, Central European time, which is 11 a.m. UK time. Don't forget. For goodness sake, make sure you press the button at least the day before. You then, for this particular culture program, you have still, as far as we know, certainly it was the case last year, you have to then print your application and post it off with a whole series of attachments on a disk. For some other programs, the system is now entirely electronic, but for the culture program, the last application process, you did have to sort of print it out and post it off with a disk. And we assume it'll be similar this year, but that may change. We'll wait and see. Applying more than once, just a very small point. You can apply it as many times as you like, but there are a couple of caveats. If you're a lead applicant, you could only apply in either small projects or large projects. You can't be a lead partner in an application in both strands. You can be a co-organizer in as many applications in as many strands as you like, but in terms of a leader, only one or the other. And if you are the project leader of a large project, you can't be the project leader of any other project until that large project has been completed. The project leader of a large project is a lot of responsibility, and they don't want you to be involved in any other projects until that particular project has concluded. So I think that's fairly straightforward. Selection process. This is the way the selection works. I mean, the main point here, as far as I'm concerned, is just to make the point that, sometimes if you're applying for a fund in your own country where you know the rules and regulations, and it may be your local ministry or arts council or whatever, and you know them and they know you and so on, you know the maximum you can apply for is 50,000 euros, and you decide to apply for 30,000 because you think that'll give you some extra credibility because you're not applying for the maximum. That doesn't apply here. If your budget can justify it, we always recommend apply for the maximum amount of money available. There's nothing to be gained by applying for less. They're never going to get back to you and ask you to justify why you're applying for the full amount, providing it makes sense in terms of the detail and the budget. That's fine. Okay, I think that's all fairly straightforward. We talked about other dates as well. Finances and budgets. Okay. No double funding. You can only get a European grant from one European program. You can't get 50% from Culture and 50% from Erasmus and 50% from Europe for Citizens, obviously. You can put in an application to Europe for Citizens and Culture program at the same time for your project. But if you were successful in both, you'd have to reject one of them. I think that's fairly straightforward. Okay. And if you found out to have been cheating in any way in this sort of area, then obviously the Commission will come down on you like a ton of bricks and ask for money back and all sorts of nasty things. So just do be careful about that one. Structure of the budget. Okay, must be submitted in euros. We've been through what the Commission will contribute. So 60%, 200,000 for small projects, 50%, 500,000 for large projects. The rest is known as the match funding. And the match funding can include income generated by the project. So ticket sales, sales of publications, registration fees, all that sort of thing. This applies to the Culture program, not to all transnational funds, but certainly for the Culture program. If you're selling tickets, programs, CDs, DVDs, workshop registrations, merchandise, mouse mats and T-shirts and gonks and goodness knows what, all of that can be included. The rest of the match funding has to be generated by the project co-organizers collectively. Okay, doesn't have to be equally split. If there's 150,000 to be generated and you've got three partners, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to generate 50,000 each. If you've got one partner in Norway and one partner in Albania, the Norwegians will have much better capacity to generate funding, presumably, than the Albanians. So it may vary. It could be from your own resources. If you have your wealthy Norwegian partner, they may well have some money sitting in their bank account. They can contribute to the project. Otherwise, it's a matter of applying for grants from other agencies, ministries, arts councils, trusts and foundations, or sponsorship, donations, crowdfunding, anything you can think of. And you can also have seconded staff. So if you have staff working for any of the partner organizations who are going to be seconded to work on this particular project for part of their time, then their equivalent salary for the part of their time they're spending on the project can be included in the budget as both income and expenditure. You can't have any contributions. Oh, sorry, staff costs. Just this slide here just provides you with a summary of what I've just said there. You do need to have some administrative additional timesheets and things like that, just to make sure you can demonstrate that the timesheets match the proportions of the salary and so on and so forth. But it should be fairly straightforward. You can't have contributions in kind for the culture program. The seconded staff is not a contribution in kind because there's real money changing hands. These people are being paid their salary. So that's not in kind. The phrase is cash must be seen to flow. So you have to have every item has to be, income and expenditure demonstrated in and out of the project budget. So for example, you can't, you may have had an arrangement in the past where your friendly printing company gave you free posters and you said they're worth 2,000 euros, so you put 2,000 euros in the budget as a contribution in kind. You can't do that. If you get posters from a printing company, they will have to send you an invoice and you must pay that invoice. If, however, that printing company then decides that they want to make a sponsorship of your project and pay you back some money, then that's entirely up to them. But money has to flow both in and out of the project. You can't have anything that's in kind. I hope that's clear. Okay. Overheads, you can include in your application a flat rate amount of 7% of the costs as towards overheads. You don't have to provide any detail of what that covers in either the application or in your final report. But if you are audited by the Commission, they audit 1 in 10 projects, so it's a possibility, then they will ask you to demonstrate that there is some link between your claim of 7% and the reality. So they would ask to see copies of invoices for electricity or telephones or photocopiers or whatever. So, you could demonstrate that there was a link, that your organization, if your project was taking up 20% of your time, then maybe you could justify it by saying, well, you've charged 20% of roughly your phone bill, things like that. Subcontracting, there's a lot in the papers about subcontracting. The key point is, don't be daunted. There is nothing wrong with subcontracting. It's absolutely fine to subcontract. The reason why there's lots of notes about subcontracting is obviously subcontracting is money that goes out of the partners and out of the project bank account. So the Commission is concerned to make sure that's spent appropriately. So if it's huge amounts of money spent on subcontracting, then you have to go through all the official procurement procedures and so on. But for most of the money that you're likely to be subcontracting, that should be fairly straightforward. In some cases, you may need to get 3 tenders to compare them and so on and so forth. But there's no problem in principle about subcontracting. Payment procedures, one of the good things about the culture program is you get money up front. So you'll see that if your project is under 750,000 euros, and most projects will be, then if it lasts less than 2 years, you get 70% of the grant within 30 days at the beginning of the project. If it's more than 2 years, you get 50% at the beginning, and then you get a further 30% once you've spent 70% of the first 50%. I hope that's clear. Interestingly, you'll see that for those two, the final payment is slightly less for the longer projects. So for the shorter projects up to 24 months, the final payment is 30%, but for the larger projects, the longer projects over 24 months, the final payment is 20%. Now the final payment always comes late. So in a way, it might be better to go for a little bit more than 24 months because then you've got slightly less money coming in at the final payment. You will have received 80% of the funding during the course of the project. Criteria. Now, this is the last little bit, so I'm just going to do my final check of the questions to see if there have been any more questions. No, no more questions. Right, there'll be time for questions at the end, so we'll allow that, but I'm just going to go through the criteria and get back to the... Okay, so one good thing these days is that the assessment process is now completely transparent. You know exactly what the criteria are, you know exactly what each criteria is worth, and you have examples of what the criteria mean in terms of what they're looking for. For the culture program, for projects, there are only 4 criteria. In fact, you will discover that there are now 4 criteria that are quite similar across many of the funding programs. There's been a sort of, a push to sort of give some commonality to the EU funding programs, and these 4 criteria are quite common. I mean, there's obviously variations in the type of program, but there are 4 areas where you'll usually find the similarities. The first criteria is how relevant is your project to the criteria that have been set for this particular strand. Okay, so this is worth 35%, so over 1/3 of the marks are about how relevant your project is. How does it contribute to the professionalization and operating transnationally? How does it contribute to the promotion of circulation of works and the mobility of artists? And how does it improve access to cultural and creative works? Also, how is it relevant to the 6 priorities? So these are the 6 priorities I mentioned at the very beginning. So, in whichever ones you've chosen, and you've chosen 2 or maybe 3 of these, how relevant is your project to the ones that you've chosen? Then there are a couple of extra ones. At the bottom here, you'll see. The first one is, to what extent is the project aiming at producing results which go beyond the sole interest of the partners and participants and have long-term impacts? This is the legacy question. What they want to see is not just something wonderful during the project, but they want to see some long-term legacy. So what are you going to do that is going to leave something positive behind after this project is over? Now, that could be quite straightforward. I mean, the simple example I always give is, if you're doing the example I gave earlier about a theatre project in a disadvantaged housing estate, well, as a result of that project, you may then decide to produce the guidebook, the template to doing similar projects. You do a detailed a guidebook about how other organizations could do this sort of project. You then, pardon me, you fill that with some pictures and images and comments from the participants. You get it translated into 3 or 4 different European languages, and you make that available for download from your website. That is producing a legacy. And you then sort of, you send out a press release to various organizations and newspapers and magazines all over Europe about the fact that you've created this useful guide relevant to organizations across Europe. That's legacy. One example, only one example. I mean, there are many other ways in which you can leave legacy. And finally, how complementary is the project to cultural actions implemented at national, regional, or local level? Now, this is a brand new criteria. It's quite interesting, because everything else here is about how your project relates to the European criteria that have been set. This is saying, and how does your project relate to the criteria within the member states of the partners and at national, regional, local level? So it may be, how does your project relate to the priorities set by the Ministry of Culture? How does the priorities relate to an arts council? How does it relate to the priorities of the arts department of the local council? So in other words, it's an opportunity for you to demonstrate that this project isn't just about European objectives, although it obviously meets those European objectives, but it's also relevant to priorities and objectives that have been set within our member state, within each of the member states of the different partners at national, regional, local level. The second criteria is the quality of the content. So what are you going to do, and how wonderful is that? 25% of the marks, so 1/4 of the marks here, about how it's going to be done, how it's going to be implemented, what are the outputs that you're going to deliver, how you're going to assess the results of what you're doing, how well defined are the individual activities, do they meet the needs of target groups, tell us about your audience development strategy, what about the experience of the team, and so on and so forth. So 25% quality of the content. 20% on communication dissemination. In other words, how are you communicating what you are doing during the project, and how are you disseminating the results of the project? Okay, and how many times are you displaying the European Union logo? Obviously, is very important. So this is about communication dissemination. And the fourth criteria is about the partnership. Okay, so how well structured are the partnerships? How well committed are the various partners? How well is the project management going to work? You know, what have you put in place to make sure that everybody's going to deliver the right things at the right place at the right time at the advertised price? And also issues about, you know, whether this partnership is going to have a life after the project, and demonstrating that partnership goes beyond the neighborhood countries of the lead organizer. And that's it. Those are the four criteria. They give you details such as these questions, and then there are different parts of the application form where you will address these. Just very briefly, just to finish up, do bear in mind that you know, if you're looking for a bit of external sort of inspiration, then the Council of Europe and the UNESCO websites have got a lot of information about cultural developments in Europe in the last 50 years. They might be interesting just to have a look at, to get some bit of background inspiration. Another organization that might be a possible source of funding is the Anna Lindh Euro-Mediterranean Foundation, which is particularly keen on partnerships between EU countries and the countries of North Africa and the Middle East. And then finally, at the bottom there is the European Foundation Centre, which is a trade body for trusts and foundations all over Europe. And they, you know, can provide a certain amount of free information about some of those trusts and foundations, which might be relevant to your project. Next steps, do make sure you're signed up to our Twitter feed, where we'll provide updates on EU opportunities. And also, obviously, sign up for the free updates and newsletters provided by the Creative Europe desk for the culture program in the UK or in your own country. They should be providing free information. For the culture program, assess which strand is right for you. Probably going to be projects, but you know, decide whether it's going to be small projects or large projects. But it may be platforms. Some people might be interested in that. Decide how ready you are. Use the template we've suggested. Which deadline you're going for, perhaps October. Have a really good idea. I know that's so simple, but anyway, really good idea, and find really good partners. We provide, you know, free information, and we also provide a range of other services to help people develop their applications. We will help people guide you through the application process if you want, and we will also provide a service to help you, you know, draft your application, or we'll provide a service to edit the drafts that you provide. If you're interested in that, obviously there is a small fee attached, and if you're a Connexus member, those are some of the other benefits that are available to Connexus members. And that's it. That's the end of this particular webinar. I'm now going to go back and look at the chat button to see if anybody else is providing any any questions really via the chat mechanism. You can see my email on that particular slide. If you want, you know, do feel free to send me any particular questions, but I'm going to stay online for a few minutes now in case anybody does have any questions that they want to put through immediately. Are there any questions? So I'm here. If anybody has any questions, then do feel free to put. Okay, Gemma has some more questions. European Cultural Foundation. European Cultural Foundation is still there. They are a completely independent organization. They have nothing to do with the European Union. They're based in Amsterdam. They do still provide a range of funding opportunities, and it's perfectly possible to apply to them for match funding for a culture program project. Many organizations, not many, but a number of organizations have successfully got match funding from the European Cultural Foundation. The Youth in Action project was not part of Europe for Citizens. Youth in Action was a completely independent strand, and that program continues as part of the new Erasmus Plus program. So the Youth in Action program is now part of Erasmus Plus, and in the webinar on Erasmus Plus, I'll be talking about the Youth in Action program, or as it's now called, just the youth strand of the new Erasmus Plus program. So that's the situation as far as they are concerned. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Again, any other questions? I'll hang on for a little bit longer, and I'll stop the webinar in 2 or 3 minutes. I'll have some coffee in the meantime. Okay, well, I think that that's probably the end of the question. So I think I'm going to sign off now. Thanks to everybody who participated in this webinar, and I think most of you, or many of you certainly, will be coming along to the other webinars that we'll be running next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or at least Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So I'll look forward to catching up with you then. So thanks to everybody, and we'll talk next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Okay, I'm off. Bye.